Thank you very much. Hey everyone, how's it going? First of all, are you enjoying the event? I think it's fantastic to be here to such a fantastic conference, and fair play to the organizing team. I think they're doing a brilliant job. So I'm here to talk about how to shift to a serverless mindset. My name's Dave Anderson. So first of all, I work at Bazaarvoice. I'm a technical fellow, which is a strange title. It's kind of like a distinguished engineer. And for Bazaarvoice, I sit in Belfast, and we work in retail. What we do is we collect, display, and distribute content, actually user-generated content, to help consumers buy online. So we have something like 12,000 brands, over 50 million reviews, questions, answers, pieces of social media, visual content, and we help something like over 1 billion consumers shop every month. So that's what I do now. And one of the reasons why I'm talking here today is I've got this book coming out, which is the Value Flywheel Effect, which I'll get into. And really what this is about is how do we maximize the value in the cloud. But first, let me tell you about kind of how I got here. My previous role was a CTO role with Liberty Mutual. And going back maybe back 2014, we'd started kind of like a digital transformation, like every big enterprise. And if you don't know Liberty Mutual, it's one of the largest insurance companies in the world. I think they have something like over $40 billion premium, 60,000 employees. And really, as we sat around the kind of leadership team, we started the dreaded digital transformation. And there was 3 things that we focused on: customer centricity, cloud native development, and agility. And me being the engineer, I kind of started to grab hold of cloud native development. And really the challenge for the organization was how do we develop faster? And with my team in Belfast, we started thinking about that. And we came up with this concept, which was a serverless first approach, which I'll explain in detail as we go through. And that really was to try and drive us forward as an enterprise. And the thing was, Liberty were partnering with AWS, with Amazon, as the public cloud provider. And the 2 things that were really important was both the move to the cloud and the modernization of how we work. You think of those 2 different things. They don't always come together, but that was the opportunity we had. When we started thinking about this 8 years ago, the serverless first approach wasn't really a thing, and we kind of worked that and kind of developed that. So let's talk about some of the struggles that big companies and small companies will have. Speed. It takes often months or weeks to get big product out into production. That's a problem that every enterprise has. Predictability. Sometimes we have kind of deadlines. Sometimes we have sad lines. We want to get something out by a certain date. But often we have real dates that we need to hit, and it's very hard to predict those dates. Cost. With any large company, the IT costs are absolutely extravagant. They go up month on month. Scalability. If you hit something like a Black Friday event, it's very hard to scale that. The big thing, I did a lot of e-commerce for Liberty. The big thing that hit us wasn't Black Friday, it was Cyber Monday. A lot of people buy their cars on Friday, they get insurance on Monday. We used to get a crazy spike on Monday. And again, if you're on-prem, that's a lot of manual effort to make that work. Or even worse, if there's a natural disaster. And plus engineering confidence. You want your engineers to be able to deploy product to production really quickly and with confidence. That need a good developer experience. And I certainly we didn't start out thinking about serverless. We kind of had a look around. We tried different options. And really this is actually the AWS definition of serverless. That speed to market. You see there's a nice quote there from Vanguard. Scaling up from like 3 months to 24 hours. You could build better applications. Lower your total cost of ownership. A good engineering team knows how much things cost. It's a great measure of an engineering team. Do they know like the daily costs of what they're running on? Improve scalability, that you can scale in an instant and let the cloud provider do the work for you. And then that run applications anywhere. That confidence to be completely kind of different in how you develop your software. So really, there's really 2 things here when you're thinking of the move to the cloud. It's modernization over migration. There's probably a bunch of people who have been through a cloud migration, but in my experience, many companies just move. They don't really modernize. For me, the modernization is the serverless mindset. That's a different way of working. So let's kind of break that out. And when I say serverless, it could be containers, whatever else. There is a modern way of writing software that you really shift that load to the cloud provider. So Amazon have this, and really this is the same for Amazon, Azure, or Google. They'll have this shared responsibility model that you think about it. If you have your software on-prem on a data center, you do everything yourself. What a lot of companies do is they'll move out to a cloud provider to that bottom red line. They'll basically move from your data center to like Amazon's data center. You've got that global scale, availability zones, brilliant, job done. That's not the end of the journey. If you go up that line another bit, you offload things to the cloud provider, like compute, storage, database, platform. You want to offload as much as possible to that cloud provider. What I've seen a lot of people do is think of their cloud migration as that red line. The modernization is the green line. And really the question that I often ask people is, where do you draw that line? And this is probably more a conversation for your infrastructure team, but I think it's important that we all understand what should we do as an organization and what do we not do. So this is the conversation we had probably for 3 years. Where do we draw the line? And when I started to really make progress, it's Werner Vogel's there he's the CTO of Amazon. We had this idea of migrate, measure, and then modernize. And this became like an iterative cycle, how we made this approach. This was in 2020. There was a virtual serverless first function event, a global event from Amazon. And Werner was doing the introduction. And I had been doing a little bit of work getting a speaker lined up with one of my team. And he talked about organizational nirvana. Companies that take a serverless first approach, offload all those tasks to the cloud, and focus on business value. And then I almost fell off my seat sitting in Belfast in the house. He says, companies like Liberty Mutual. I thought, this is insane. We're onto something here. You know, from what started as a crazy idea on a whiteboard, they have the CTO of Amazon talking about this approach. And really, the idea is that for every piece of software you write, you look at a managed service first. And if that doesn't work, you then scale back to what you need to do. The phrase serverless is not something I really like. It's a very bad name for this. But if you think of the adoption curve, all the major cloud providers have different functions between Amazon, Azure, and Google. And really, this is a survey from Datadog came out a few months ago. Over half of organizations that adopt the cloud are currently using some kind of serverless. So you're probably doing this already in your organization, but in pockets. So it's something that from engineers, some engineers will say, oh, we don't do that. But it's very common for a lot of cloud teams. There's a few myths around serverless. I'm not going to get into the technical details, but I'm interested to hear if you hear any of these lines from your engineering team. We're different. We can't do that. We need to build everything ourselves. No, you don't. If you're Amazon or Azure or Google, if you're building the cloud, fair enough. If not, build it in someone else's hardware. The fear of vendor lock-in, this is kind of an oldie. We don't want to be locked into a single vendor because we're big and we're special. No, you're not. You may be portable, but you're probably out of business because you haven't been hitting your customer value. Speed trumps flexibility every time. The consultants don't like it. If you've got a couple of hundred consultants from large consultancy house helping your migration, that's not necessarily a good thing for you. Your migration might go on for years, cost millions of pounds or euro, but you may not get the value. I don't think consultants don't really like serverless because it's fast. Serverless is immature, maybe in 2016, but not anymore. Our engineers are not ready. This is a really common myth around serverless. It's too hard. This has nothing to do with modern software. It's because you're not training your engineers. The cloud changes every month. It's constantly changing. You need to invest in training. If your engineers are under pressure, just look to see how much training they're getting. It gets expensive really fast because a lot of the managed services and serverless are pay-as-you-go. And there's a fear that your bill will fly out of control. This is just a normal cloud principle. You have to understand OpEx over CapEx. You will have a monthly bill, and it will fluctuate. You have to invest in FinOps. Good teams know how much their software costs. It's like having a mobile phone and never looking at the bill and making calls. Yes, you will get caught. You need to be aware of your spend. And finally, our security tools don't work. If your security is slowing down the technical adoption in your company, you need to educate security. That's not a reason not to modernize. That's probably one of the things I see most, where the CISO is uncomfortable because the suite of tools they bought 5 years ago don't work anymore. That's a different problem. So really, the way I like to describe this, it's almost like the second transformation. If you're through this transformation, everyone's, the consultants have been paid, the bonus pool has been emptied, everyone's got their cloud socks, so let's go. But often, and I have seen this, the CEO or the board are asking questions to say, okay, our IT bill is actually higher than it was. We've spent a huge amount of extra money on this transformation. I love the fact that we're all excited, but I'm not seeing anything move faster. I think there's a second transformation, which is that modernization transformation. So one way I want to kind of illustrate that is with a really simple value chain. So say you're a board member or a CEO, you have a need for business value. I don't mean in your project, across the company. We look at the company as an asset to make sure that company you're getting proper ROI. For me, business value depends on leadership. You need leadership in your company to make sure that that is realized properly. Leadership requires technical leadership. You need architects, your senior engineers to be basically on the money. They need to be driving the company forward. You also need engineer skills. When that technical strategy is in place, you need engineers who can execute on that. And finally, you need that modern cloud operations. Modern cloud ops is probably going to sound a bit out there, but there are certain, I would say, smells if your cloud operations team are kind of not keeping up to speed. So one of the techniques I use in the book is called Wardley mapping. A guy called Simon Wardley from England has got this way of plotting the evolution of technology. So really start with your customer need, which is the board member here at the top. And it's their visibility from what they see at the top, business value, to what's less visible at the bottom. Your board member may be frustrated about the lack of business value, but they can't see how mature the engineer skills are or the modern cloud operations. From left to right here, you've got the evolution of capability, right? And this works for technology, capability, regardless. There's always this evolution from left to right. When something first comes up, it's Genesis, novel. There's this brand new thing. It's wonderful. It's so exciting. We just want to learn about it. As that starts to evolve, it becomes custom built or emerging. And so we understand this thing is now possible. We start to get it, but we're not quite good at it yet. Then something evolves to be productized, that we're getting good at it, and there's market demand. And then it evolves to be commodity. It's best practice. It's the cost of doing business. We just know we need this thing. Every technology and capability moves from left to right. So as you plot this value chain on this map, you can actually see where you would place these things. The movement, and as you do this as a team, you can actually plot the movement. What are the things we need to do to move these things from left to right? And there's then inertia. What is the inertia that will stop that movement? So this is a technique I've been using for about 10 years now. We've pretty much mapped everything. And it is like the secret sauce. It's the way you can pretty much tell the future, which is crazy in technology. You can pretty much map out a landscape and predict where the movement will be, which you can get a step ahead of it. Now, for our second transformation problem here, some of the things that we talk about in the book is this idea of how would you move some of these capabilities from left to right. So business value, we will often have a business goal, which is very well understood. Do we have an engineering North Star? Are the engineering teams, do they understand what that business value is? So often having an engineering North Star that you can translate that business goal to something the engineering teams will understand. For leadership, psychological safety is something that will move that from left to right into that kind of good practice area. Creating psychological safety, the ability to challenge thinking, to challenge ideas. We state a goal, let's challenge how we get there. For your technical leadership, people say technical leadership is magic. It's not really. All the cloud providers have well-architected frameworks. There are very clear definitions of what's good architecture and what is not. Use something that is good practice. Don't let your technical leaders invent new architecture. Technology is not that new. Next, from your cloud skills, you have to create a learning environment. Learning doesn't have to be classroom. It can be virtual, labs, workshop, coaches, guest speakers. You have to invest the time in training because a lot of the really good cloud content is free online. So you can actually, you need to train your engineers in cloud. And finally, and this is probably the most hidden one, your modern cloud infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure teams are working on custom-built environments that are too confusing and they're tying themselves in knots. Go to your cloud provider and ask them for their best practice and use it. Do not reinvent the wheel. There's companies that are now very good at creating cloud infrastructure, use their best practice. So these are a lot of what I would call techniques to move these things from left to right. So really what the book's about is that idea of a value flywheel. When you think of the iterative nature of what I've just spoke through, if you've got clarity of purpose, your engineers need to understand exactly what you're doing and why, and there's really good sort of partnership between product and engineering. Challenge, creating that environment where people can speak up, challenge the thinking, not the person, and understand why we're going where we're going. Next best action. If you train your engineers well, they can use the latest managed services and serverless technology to build quickly. And then finally, long-term value. If you've got good architects and good technical leaders, they will know what that long-term roadmap looks like and bake it in. And that all sits on what I would call a foundation of modern cloud operations. So this is exactly the model I used for many years in Liberty, and with great success over that. So I want to kind of break into a quick kind of story about how to illustrate that. Back in about, I think about 2016, we were just starting to pull together the idea of a serverless first kind of approach, still feeling our way around. And obviously, as a big insurance company, we had a lot of call centers, a lot of kind of hokey telephony, which I won't name any of the vendors. Stuff was very old-fashioned and slow. And we had lots of people sitting answering phones. And we had this idea of chatbots were all the rage. So we had the idea of putting a chatbot in to answer some very basic kind of calls. So while we had pitches from a lot of the biggest vendors. I'll not name them, but you can imagine who they are. Telling us they could do this and X, Y, Z, and all these fancy AI technologies. So he says, let us build a prototype. We think we can build a prototype in 12 weeks. And some of the vendors were saying, well, we can give you a proposal in 12 weeks. He says, no, let us build something in 12 weeks, and we'll see what happens. So our idea was, using a serverless-first approach, we would use the same technology as Alexa, which is Lex under the hood. We would use Amazon Connect, which is their call center in the cloud, and we would rapidly iterate to build this capability. So we built a fully functioning sort of voice assistant in 12 weeks, and it was quite simple. I mean, if you called in and you hired a car and you couldn't remember where to pick it up, you could say, I hired a car, where should I pick it up? Give you an address. Quite straightforward. But we got that to production in 12 weeks, taking 150 calls a month. Really simple. Like tiny for a company that size, but it was working and live. Fast forward 2 years, we started to ramp up the traffic. We were asked to do a talk at AWS reInvent, which is their global kind of event for technology to demo the solution. That's one of the architects, Laura McFarland from Belfast, or should I say from Larne, in the middle there. We talked about, as we ramped up the call volume, utterance recognition was over 90%. We're starting to add in more conversations. It would do things like it would understand yes, I. A lot of these things we were tuning the model. We were getting really low call deflections and really low callbacks. Fantastic customer experience. One of the funny things we got was, can you make it sound more robotic? Because people like to bark orders at the chatbot. So we were baking all that stuff in, starting to build up traffic. They may be around 200,000 calls a month. Then COVID hits, 2020. So what's the one thing we never designed for? In an insurance company, you never design for no claims. But obviously, as lockdown started, people stopped driving their cars. The claims stopped, the calls stopped. So because this was a serverless, cloud-based call center, it scaled down with less traffic. So you stop paying hosting fees as the traffic scales down. On the flip side, overnight, there was a decision made to repay a lot of premium. Our outgoing payment system ramped up both serverless systems. One scaled down with lack of traffic, the other one scaled up. Two completely unpredictable situations, but the systems handled it without extra changes. Fast forward another 2 years, 2020, it's one of my old team members, Matt Coulter, on stage speaking at the keynote of reInvent about the serverless first enterprise that Liberty Mutual is. So again, going from a crazy idea from a few architects to actually being on stage saying, this is what serverless first enterprise. A huge journey over the space of a couple of years. Looking forward, if you think of what that was, this is not a quick fix. Back in 2016, there was clarity of purpose. The engineers thought big and being completely customer-centric, and how do we completely revolutionize how we do call centers? How do we build a serverless call center in the cloud? Challenge, we actually sat and Wardley mapped out that entire landscape back in 2016. Now, we didn't put a date on it, like Matt will be on stage in whatever 2022, but we mapped out that entire journey. We could see what we had to invest in, what we didn't want to invest in, where we needed to focus on the customer experience of the voice assistant and the scalability of those systems. Next best action, everything was serverless, which meant a lot when that scale came, AWS handled it. And then finally, long-term value. We used a well-architected process all the way through to make sure we had security, cost optimization, operational excellence, reliability, and performance. So they were all baked into that product right the way across. And this is just one project. There was probably like 10 or 15 projects like this. This happened right across the enterprise. And again, this is just a different way of thinking. Engineers want to build, but taking this approach, engineers start to think about what's the business value that we need to create in the cloud, and not getting obsessed with, is it Kubernetes or Docker or whatever else. So within the book now, we've got this model which is called the Value Flywheel Effect. And again, it's these 4 stages. Clarity of purpose, and really this comes from the top. You need to be crystal clear what you're doing and why you're doing it. So some techniques we've found to be really useful is the North Star by Amplitude, which is fantastic. And even then, measuring time to value. We could often talk about, can we measure innovation? No, measure time to value. Worry about the innovation later. Challenge, create an environment of success and psychological safety. Being able to Wardley map a strategy on the wall and challenge that map, thinking, what if? Here's an inertia point. What about this movement? Let's move. How do we move that across? That opens up conversation that we can challenge each other. Next best action, create a brilliant developer experience so engineers can go fast and train them in the latest technology. They will absolutely blow away your expectations. And then long-term value, create a problem prevention culture. We eradicate problems before they happen. Use a best practice like well architected to measure goodness. And then we even start talking about sustainability as a way of measuring kind of success, but more on that in the book. So that's the kind of story. So what I've done is I've captured that whole technique in kind of detail with Wardley mapping. There's 4 case studies in there, which is Liberty Mutual, the BBC, a cloud guru, and a startup called WorkGrid Software. It'll be published by IT Revolution, a US-based company, and in end of November, and it's part of like the kind of the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Other books in that label, things like the Phoenix Project, Accelerate, etc. We have a blog called theserverlessage.com and a bit of messing on serverless crack. And be really interested to see what you think of the book. For me, I think the ability to think of modernization, not just migration, that ability to merge business technology strategies is absolutely priceless. It's so valuable. The amount of companies that will come up to me and say, we've migrated to the cloud, but the value's not there. There's an entire second transformation that we need to start thinking about. Thanks very much.
David, hold on. We'll see if we have any questions from the audience. All very quiet after their lunch. We have a question just down here, halfway down on the centre aisle.
I forgot to say, actually, I'll be doing one of the forums at 4 o'clock. We'll continue the conversation. So I think that's on the Empower stage.
And just on the Wardley maps, I think that's a really interesting area. Where can people find out more about how to use those?
It's in the book.
In the book. There is some case studies as well, isn't there, in YouTube, of people have used it for different.
There's a whole bunch of, there's a great site called Learn Wardley Mapping. The technique itself is pretty much open sourced, so there's a lot of great content. There's lots of information in the book about taking you on that journey and how you do it and tips and techniques. I would just Google Wardley Mapping. There's lots of really interesting examples.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, great. Like I said, David is part of the talks later on as well, so please do join him there. And David, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.